Hi, this is Joe Shannon. I'm a lawyer, a husband, a father of 6 kids, and I also host a podcast called Opening Statement with Joe Shannon. Please consider listening to our podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple, and any other folks that host podcasts. Just Google Joe Shannon and podcast, and you'll find it. I hope you enjoyed the show. All right. Wow. This is going to be a great time. You know what? I've been looking to interview a number of religious throughout the world, and one of my producers, Ashley Zurich, stumbled upon one of the great ones, Canadian, Sister Sue Mosteller of the. What is your order, sister?
Sisters of St. Joseph of Toronto.
Oh, nice. So Sisters of St. Joseph in Toronto, and wow, what a life she's led and is leading. And so I'm really blessed, lucky to interview her and maybe introduce you to somebody that is a little bit north of the border for us, but has had a huge impact on what's going on. And so welcome so much, sister.
Glad to be here, Joe. It's really a pleasure. Thank you.
So listen, we're in the middle of this craziness right now in the world. Everything's come to a standstill in America. I'm assuming it's similar up in Toronto as well, right?
Same thing. Yeah. No, we're locked in.
Yeah, and so very interesting time. I mean, I guess over the centuries, there's been the bubonic plague, there's been the Spanish flu epidemic 100 and some years ago, and these are kind of century times that we're living in, and although we're very wired now, where you and I can talk, and you're in Toronto, I'm in Chicago, it's almost we're back to the basics where everybody's got to stay in their house. How are you dealing with that, sister?
Well, I have to say that I think I'm experiencing a miracle, and I don't know how to say that otherwise, but I have to say, like, I live in a home with 6 other sisters, and we're all over 80, and we've been locked up together for the last 8 weeks, and we don't go out because we're all afraid to bring the virus back in. So we're really careful, like even just to go and mail a letter, you're just kind of nervous because you don't want to make anybody else sick in the house. But the beautiful thing is that, we're retired, so we have time. I have time. I'm happy because I can pray more. I'm happy to spend more time with Jesus. And we have a beautiful little chapel, and I can go there. Sometimes I fall asleep, but I never care because I'm just entrusted to him anyway. But the fact that we're still getting along, that we can still have such amazing, great laughs together, and that everybody's, with all their diminishments, I mean, everybody is just making this huge effort to be relational. And I'm just learning things about love that really nourish my heart, because I watch them, one who can hardly see, another one who's on a walker, somebody else who's experiencing a lot of allergies and so on. But they come to the dinner table, we come and we get together, and we're just very congenial. Now that has to be a miracle. Can't be anything else. I just every day I have to give thanks, because I just ask God every day to give us the love for each other that God has, and help us to love one another. But that is it's such a gift.
One of the things and one of the reasons why I wanted to do a podcast, and I started this a little bit before this whole thing hit, but I really identified it during this time, is there's so much negativity and bad news out there that I wanted to interview people that have had a life that's meaningful, and that has hope and love, and so I wanted to talk to people that had that type of thing, and so I wanted to introduce. So let me give you a little background. I think I had told you before the interview that I'm one of 10 kids. I'm number 9, and just blessed to be from the family that I was from. My parents, Tom and Joanne. My dad's 98 now,
Oh, my goodness.
and he lives with my sister out in Seattle. And but my mom had she grew up in Spokane, Washington. She was born in Spokane, and their family had a relationship with this group called the Poor Clares of Spokane.
Right.
And so the Poor Clares, as you know, is an order that lives in simplicity and lives off of the charity of others completely. And so my grandparents, who were in Spokane, had a relationship with them way back in the early 1900s. And now I rekindled that relationship through my uncle, who's a Jesuit priest who would say mass for them all the time. So I'm understanding your situation when you're with a number of nuns that are living in community, and such a beautiful life of dealing with each other. So wow, that's a great story about you getting closer to your faith at this point in time.
Yeah, it's really it's a gifted time, and what you say about the anger, I read about it, and I hear it on the news, and I feel sad in a way, because this really is a time for us to be able just to review things, just to look at, is this, is the way I've been living the way I want to live? Is this the legacy that I want to leave to the people who will follow after me? And, what are my gifts, and what are the things that give me life and energy, not just my work, but what are the things that are in my heart that I really want to express, and I want to be expressed in the world while I'm still here, And so I feel sad for people who have no inspiration and who have this is why I'm happy to do this interview, because I just long that one of the things I was going to say in the interview when I got some of the questions, when I was in school for the first 8 years, I was learning, and that was wonderful and everything. And then I was sent to a convent school where there were nuns that were teaching us. And during those years, my heart woke up uh, because I was being taught about things of the heart and not just about the mind. And so I was being taught to be a good person, to be loving, and to work with my fears and my anxieties, and to not be afraid of pain and vulnerability. And those things kind of awoke something inside of me that was much, much deeper than I had ever had in school before that. And that's why I loved that school, and I loved the sisters and wanted to become like them. And
Wow.
it was that inspiration. So now I sit and I'm old and so on, but I'm just totally grateful for what has been given. And so
That's wonderful. One of my favorite saints is a nun, Saint Teresa of Calcutta, and
yes,
world famous, obviously, and known more from her about her actions by most of the world than by her spirituality. I mean, obviously, we're all proud of her, and where she grew up. I think she was born in Albania,
that's
ended
right.
up entering some Irish nuns,
Yeah.
and was a school teacher in India, and then saw the profound need, and kind of moved to that, and then formed her own order to serve the desperately poor in Calcutta.
That's right.
And so I think that's the same, your journey is interesting to me, in that, if you could just tell us, give us a brushstroke of your upbringing, and then what led you to your main vocation that you've lived over these years.
Okay, so I was the youngest in a family of 6. My father worked in timber and was away quite a bit. He wasn't interested in spirituality or in spiritual things. My mother, on the other hand, was very interested in those things. So there was a bit of difficulty in that sort of thing, that my father just had never touched it before, and so on. And so we were sent to the public school. We all went to the public school, and then when the war came, my brother had to, his school was on flex time, and he got a job in a factory, and he made quite a bit of money. And he said, I'd like to go away to school. And my mother said, well, she came from Toronto, and we were living in Akron, Ohio at that time, in the States. I was born and raised there. And so my mother said, I know a wonderful school, and it's St. Michael's, and you should go there. So he took off and went there. And then there was some money left, and my mother, to my mother. And so she talked to my father and sent the two eldest girls to the sisters in Toronto to boarding school, and so on. And so it just progressed, so that gradually we were all in school up here. And then my father died suddenly of a heart attack. And after about a year, my mother said, what am I doing down here? You're all up there. So I'm coming up there. And one by one, each of us asked and really wanted to become Catholics, because we were raised in the Episcopalian tradition. And my mother had taken us to church. We were in the choir and so on. So here we were then, settled in Toronto, and I was still in school with the sisters and everything. But as I said, I was inspired by them, and and so I wanted to join them. So after we had grade 13 at that time, which was the last year of high school, and I left at 19 and joined the convent.
Hold on a second. So this is a pretty big moment, right? So I have two uncles that became Jesuit priests, and they did it different times. But okay, so you're out of high school, you really like the way the sisters awakened your spirituality, your heart, vulnerability, all that type of stuff. How did how was that discussion with your mother about entering the vocation?
I think she was happy, because she loved the sisters, and she didn't give me any flack about that at all. And my brothers and sisters thought I was crazy, which was typical, because I was the youngest, so everything I did was crazy. But I had learned about that, so I just tried to go along with it. My brother had entered the seminary, though, and he became a priest. And he joined the order that ran his school in St. Michael's in Toronto, and was a priest and a teacher all his life, and a pastor. And he died a few years ago. So he had joined, and then my sisters were getting married and so on. So there was no big deal. It was quite smooth, actually. I just went from my graduation from high school, and then I went to the convent.
Now, and was that what the Sisters of St. Joseph taught you as well?
That's right. It was those sisters that taught me. So I went right to the place where I knew.
Yeah, and so I've been to Montreal, but I've never been to the Basilica St. Joseph. Is that a pretty impressive place?
It's a beautiful place. It's very nice. I'm in Toronto, but the Basilica and a lot of things have happened there, I think miracles and so on. I've been to it a couple of times, and there are all these crutches hanging on the wall and things where people found a cure from St. Joseph in that oratory. But it's on a small little hill. I mean, Montreal is full of hills and so on, but this is on a hill. So it's impressive in the sense of going up towards it and so on. It's a lovely shrine.
If I'm not mistaken, I want to say that St. Elizabeth Ann Seton started out in the Church of England and then became a Catholic too. I'm not so sure about that. Is that true?
I don't know, because I don't know her well enough. I know who she is, but I don't know her well.
Well, she was I believe, is the first American saint, at least a woman, and and I think she's the one that started the Catholic school system pretty much in America. So that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah.
But so then tell me about your approach. How you went into the convent, and then what happened? How did you move in?
So I was 19 years old. I couldn't express to you how naive I was, because I had been, very sheltered in my family and so on. So I wasn't, I had dates and so on in high school, but I mean, hopeless in terms of just knowing about the world and about life and so on, and quite naive. But the novitiate doesn't help you with that very much because it's all spirituality. So it's not very much about really living in life. And so after I made my first vows, I was sent to teachers college and became a teacher, and I taught for 15 years. So I taught in lower school, and then I went on to teach in high school and so on. And then it was during those teaching years that I made my final vows. I was always happy in the convent. I never had a big argument with it. So I can't say that it was terribly hard for me. I was always happy. There were good people. Everybody was kind to me. I didn't have any terrible superiors or anything like that. So I was saved, I think, from all that, and just living and going to the next thing. And then in 1967, I went to a lecture one night because we had to go out in partners. And one of the sisters I was studying at the time, and she said she wanted to go out. And I said, what is it? She said, it's a lecture at the university. And I said, who is it? She said, I don't know. She said, it's a man from France and he works with people with disabilities. I said, I'm really not interested, but I said, if you can't find anybody else, I'm free, so I'll go with you. So she came at supper and she said, I didn't find anybody. So I said, okay, I'll go. So I sat down, and then this man began to speak, and my heart just went up. It's quite hard because right now, particularly John Vanier has been a huge influence in my life, and it's just been revealed since December that John had been he had been accused of abusing some women, and so now we have this kind of double thing with Jean, and it's very, very difficult for me because I knew him for 50 years. He was a huge, huge impact in my life, and spiritually, I would say he was the one who gave me the living Jesus. I mean, his lectures and his talks and his retreats, I learned about Jesus, who is alive for me in that sense. So I'm going to speak about him because I really love him. And I also respect those women. I'm not in any way I pray for them, and I'm very sorry that happened. And I don't approve, of course, but I don't know how to put all that together because I never saw anything similar to that in my relationship with Jean.
Yeah.
And so I went to this lecture. He was giving the lecture, and he started talking about, again, I can tell you this after 50 years, he started talking about the poor, and he had welcomed some people with intellectual disabilities to live with him from institutions in France. And he said, poverty is a difficult thing because he said it's like a circle. He said when we're poor, we're not feeling good about ourselves, and then we don't take care of ourselves because we don't have any reason to, and nobody's looking at us anyway. And so it's like a cycle, and you just keep you go down and you can't get out of it unless somebody reaches in and gives you a hand. That's what he talked about that night. And my heart, and he was talking about these little homes that he had, a couple of little homes in France with people with disabilities. Anyway, he went back to France and so on, but I went up afterwards and I just said I was very moved by that. And he said, well, I'm coming back in March and I'll be giving a weekend. And so I went to the weekend and so on. So that's how I got to know him. And that L'Arche movement was just kind of moving out of France. There were people that went there and served there and then wanted to come back to their own home countries and start. So there was a couple that had come back to Canada in the 1960s, in the late 60s, and they were just starting a community here called L'Arche Daybreak. And so anyway, after I had been a year or two or three listening to Jean Vanier and going to these talks and everything, I just thought that'd be a nice place to go. So I went to my superior and I said, I'd like to go to L'Arche. And she said, well, that's nice, but we need you to teach. So just, so I said, okay. So, but anyway, then the next year I went back and I said, I really want to go to L'Arche.
Right.
And anyway, she listened. And after 2 or 3 years, I said to her one day, I said, I think we should pray about this, because I said, if this is something, we need to pray, because maybe this is a call. I said, I don't know, but, and so she said, that's good. She said, let's do that. And she said, let's do it for 2 or 3 weeks. And she said, I'll call you. Don't you call me. So I said, okay. After about 2 or 3 or 4 days, I got this call, and she said, I think you should go. Unheard of, Joe.
That
Completely.
is terrific. So then you get this, you're inspired. You feel like you have a longing to help, and the part about that people don't understand sometimes is that about religious orders, etc., is there is an obedience factor to it.
Correct.
And it sounds like you were there, and God first, others second, me last, and you're there. You get the permission to branch out, to go. And tell us about moving to Arch. How was that?
Well, it's so funny, because when I started getting ready and everything, I looked in the mirror one day and I said, I don't know one thing about people with disabilities. I hardly have met anybody. I'm scared of people on the street when I see
Sure.
them.
Yeah.
And what am I doing? What am I doing? I had an opportunity to visit the community in France, and I was very comfortable there. But I mean, basically, in my own self, I had no experience at all. And anyway, I just said, well, now it's happened. I've got to just do it. So I got myself there, and there were 12 people with disabilities in the house and 12 assistants. And because we had a farm and the people worked on the farm, so some of the assistants worked on the farm and some of the assistants worked in the home. And the day I got there, I was the head of that house. I was responsible for it. So the director welcomed me and said he was so happy I was there and so on. And then he said, here's the manual from the government of the responsibilities of the person who's responsible for the home. And of course it was just way over the top for me. Because I was teaching school, I didn't know anything.
Right. Yeah.
And
How old were you? How old were you then, sister?
that would have been in 72. So I was born in 33. So I was 29 or 39.
So okay, so basically you get there, you basically have no
Nothing.
experience running anything.
Nothing. Well, I was principal of the schools, so I could organize.
Okay.
Of course, that was my great gift. As a sister, everything has to be clean. It has to be, everything has to be put away and so on. These assistants were people who were hippies at the time, kind of walking across the country and then just stopping in and saying, I'd like to stay. And then they stay for a year or two with their backpack, and they are as messy as you could imagine. And so I'm in there trying to, you open the door of their bedroom and you just fall over in a faint because it's so terrible. And
Right.
So they just couldn't bear having me as the leader. It was so awful. And so we had to compromise a little bit both ways. And no, again, the people that I learned to know there and to care about were just amazing friends.
How long were you there, sister?
40 years.
So you were at L'Arche Daybreak for 40 years. So how big is L'Arche in Canada?
I think there are about 30 communities in Canada, and that's in all the big cities, and then in rural areas as well. Some of the communities are very small, 1 or 2 homes, and then other communities, like at one time at Daybreak, we had 14 homes. So then we divided, and half the homes were in downtown Toronto and half were in a suburb north of Toronto. So that's how you sort of evolve with the thing. And so you don't want to get huge, because the smaller communities can have a better life together, and emphasize the whole community aspect of it.
And so tell me a little bit about that. So I've read some of your I haven't read your books yet. I'd like to read those, and I will. But I just kind of skimmed some of your career, and one of the things that you mentioned was that you've learned a lot from these people that you've dealt with over the last 40 years, and learned a lot about what it means to to be, poor,
Yeah.
and what it means to listen to people, and how to learn from these folks. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, one of the questions that you had sent that you might ask, and it was, who are the people that have influenced your life? And I would say that I really have received so much from these people, I can't tell you. And I think one of the things that has a turning point for me when I kind of realized it is that Jesus says, blessed are the poor. He doesn't say, blessed are those who care for the poor.
Right.
And so I went, and so many of us go to the poor with that attitude of, I want to help these poor things. So we go and we pour ourselves out and we dump stuff on them, but we never are open to kind of a mutuality. And the wonderful thing about L'Arche is it's a community. So everybody has gifts. And as they come and as they get settled and so on, we're talking to them about giving their gift to the community, whatever that is. And maybe you can't speak, and maybe you can't do a lot of things because your body isn't so good. But one thing you have is this amazing smile. And we have so many visitors here, and they need to know that they're welcome. So your job is to smile and to make visitors feel welcome and to show them around the house and to do that. So that's your gift. And so every year we have a night where we say, the gift that I'll give the community next year is this gift. This is the gift I have. And everybody in the community has a gift. We make a poster, we put it on the wall, and then we call people to give their gifts. So tonight we're having visitors. So you, madam, are responsible to welcome them, to give them their seats at the table and so on. And so they just rise up. And of course they're delighted because they have responsibility and because that's their job and they want to do it well and they want to do it for the whole community.
Wow. And maybe that's the first time they've been asked
Ever.
rather than, because, that's, I always find that in relationships is, sometimes, we think, oh, we want to give, but really, it's really important to let other people give to us, isn't it?
Oh, I tell you. And the thing, what they do give us, I mean, again, another really life-changing thing for me. One night we were at the table and it was a big table. There were a lot of us there. And one of the men worked on the farm and he used to come in and he'd come to the dinner table, but he wouldn't take his shower before he came to the table. So when he came to the dinner table, you'd have this lovely dinner and then you'd sit next to Paul and he smelled like the barn. And so he brought all the cows with him and so on. And of course, me, the nun, I wanted to say everything's so nice, so I'd say, Paul, it'd be so nice if you'd take your shower before dinner because you're sitting at the table with all of us and so on. And that's just courtesy. And he'd say, yeah, he said, that'd be nice, but I don't want to. And so I had these conversations with him many times. So this night we were sitting at the table. I had cooked the dinner. I'd had a busy day. I cooked for all these people. I put the lovely dinner on the table, sat down next to Paul, and there were the cows right there, right in my face. And so I just lost it, and I don't know what happened. I turned to him. I said, Paul, I can't understand it. I said, this is so awful. I said, here's this beautiful dinner. And I went on and he said, well, I told you. He said, I don't want to. He said, I don't like getting undressed twice. I have to get undressed and get dressed again for supper. He said, I like to get undressed and and put on my pajamas and then go to bed. So he said, so anyway, I kept pushing. And of course and everybody was dead silent. At the table was perfectly quiet. The mouths were open. They were just looking at us. And we had this horrendous fight right at the dinner table. And finally, Paul just got up and he slammed his chair into the table and he walked out and he slammed the dining room door. So then we're sitting there and I sort of looked across the table. I said, well, Mary, what did you do at work today? Tried to get things going again. So I was steaming though, and I was hot and bothered and terrible. We did the dishes. I was still just racing to get out of there and I wanted to get to my room. When I came out the door, Frank, a man with Down syndrome, was standing at the door waiting for me. He said, Sue, come here. And I said, what is it, Frank? He said, come with me.
Oh,
So I followed him, took me down to his bedroom. He said, sit down. I sat on the bed. He closed the door and he stood over me. Of course, I knew he was going to talk about the argument. So anyway, I was sitting there and I was waiting and he said, I see you're having some trouble with Paul. Felt like saying, you're very observant. But anyway, I said, that's right, Frank. And I said, I'm really sorry. I said, I'm very sorry that happened. And I said, I don't want you to worry, because I said, I'll go to Paul tonight. I said, Paul and I are friends. And I said, I'll talk to Paul and we'll make that up. So you don't have to worry. I hope you won't, I really want you to sleep tonight. I don't want you to think about this. It'll be fine. And he's standing looking down at me, and I'm sort of apologizing as much as I can. And then, so there's this pause, and he's just looking at me with this beautiful face, peaceful. And he just says, Sue, if you want to help Paul, you have to love him. And then he said, that's all. And so he walked over and opened the door, and I got up and walked out. But that was a turning point, Joe. That was a huge turning point, because the absolute gift of Frank doing that for me, and it has influenced my whole life.
What did it teach you?
It taught me that I don't go and just give, but I go and I try to discover who is this person and what can we share as we walk together. And maybe I have something to give, but I certainly have something to receive.
Sure.
And
Yeah. My mom always told me, you got one mouth and two ears, kid.
beautiful.
Yeah, do a little more listening than talking. And I tell you, I think I would have been yelling at Paul too, my kids. But I guess that's kind of the route. In my business, so I'm a trial lawyer. So one of the things that I always, I'm very egotistical.
Uh-huh.
I'm a hard worker, a little vain, all those types of things, and that's why I really need to dive deep into my faith, because that's the opposite of where I need to be effective. And I think you're right. I think that vulnerability, that understanding that you don't have all the answers, that you need God in your life, that you need others in your life to help you. All those things are such great gifts that I've kind of picked up. It took a long time. It takes a long time for these things to happen. I think we get hit by a lot of different flack in life, and we try and figure that stuff out. But boy, that vulnerability, not having all the answers, and listening to even the I have an 11-year-old. Listening to my 11-year-old and tell me what he thinks about things is important.
So important. It's so important. And there's something so beautiful about what they're telling you, but we're going too fast. And so we're not stopping to be present when it's happening for us. And therefore we don't get it. We just take and run.
What are some of I'm getting the message from you that you've had a very, very happy life.
Oh yeah.
And you're happy right now.
Oh yeah.
So give me some of the, and I think, my generation and the upcoming generations, they want that too. They want it bad.
No question.
Maybe they don't have the recipe book for it. Give us some habits for you. I know you don't claim to have all the answers, and I know that you've written books. You're a spiritual advisor. You do all these different things. Give us some habits that you have in your life that have aided you through this roller coaster of a life that we all have.
Okay, I think that's a really good question, because I've had to learn those things as I go along, and I really believe that there are things we can choose to do. I was saying earlier that this time that we have now to just look at our lives and say, is this how I want to live? Are these the kind of relationships I want to have? And for me, one really important thing is, if I don't well, if I do want to have something, if I want to have a life, if I want to find joy and so on, I need to be accountable for what I want. In other words, I have to take count of where I'm not doing what makes me happy. And so I always say that we need people in our lives to whom we say, I trust you. I want to come regularly, maybe 6 or 7 or 8 times a year. And I want to sit down and I want to just go through. Here are the areas that I want and feel successful in, but here are the ones where I'm falling down. And if you have any words for me, I'd be grateful to have those. I'd be grateful if you'd talk to me about that. So you don't have to, tell me what to do, but just give me your ideas. What has helped you? And so for all the years of my life, I've had people. Jean Vanier was one of them, and I would go and just spill the beans. I'd say I hate everybody, and I'm ready to kill everybody, and so on. And then he'd just laugh like you're doing, and then he'd say, so how's your prayer life? How are you spending any time in solitude? Are you listening to your heart? Are you, and those things were just so helpful to then, and I do have to stop every day. I have not long, but I have to reflect, and I have to say yes to be who I want to be. And for those vulnerabilities, I don't have to apologize too much. I'm trying, I'm doing my best, but I don't have to apologize for not being perfect. And so I've learned that whole thing of being accountable to somebody is very. The other thing is, who are the people who are my friends, and who are the people that I spend time with, and that where there's interaction, where yes, we like each other because I have something to offer and you have something to offer. And so we're there to choose those kind of friends, and not friends that I have to be telling them they're so wonderful all the time, or I have to perform for them. Not those kind. So
Right.
that I choose the people and I spend time with people who are mutually on the path with me. And so I think that's also very important. I think times of quiet and solitude are important. Once a year, to take some time maybe to just go into silence for a couple of days and to have some reflection time. Those are things that have helped me along the way greatly.
That's great. And then I know that you mentioned some folks already that have been pivotal in your life. Are there any other folks that that have been really pivotal people in your life that have kind of shown you the right way to be?
Well, this man who is an author that I spoke about before we started the video, his name is Henry Nouwen, and he's a spiritual writer. He was a priest, came from Holland. This was a man who was completely off the rails in so many ways, just with a huge heart and a mind that just like a trap that could grasp everything. So it was a gift, but it was also just very, very hard. That he was very, very bright, taught at Harvard and at Yale, and hated Harvard. Just hated it because it was so looking for power and money and so on. And he said you couldn't talk about God there and be comfortable, and he didn't like that. And I think. And he went to South America for a year wanting to give his life to the poor. He lived with some priests there. And I mean, after he was just nervous and anxious, and he was all over the place. This man, though, again, he lived with us for 10 years at L'Arche Daybreak. And when he came to join us as our pastor, we asked him to look after the most handicapped person in his home. He had to live in the home with the people. And he had to help Adam with his morning routine. Adam couldn't stand, he couldn't walk, he couldn't get out of bed. Henry had to get him up, take him to the bath. He had to walk with him and hold him because he couldn't walk by himself. And he had to give him the bath, and Adam didn't speak. And so, and of course, Henry, who he never stopped talking, and he just was really anxious and nervous and everything. For him to slow down that much for 2 hours to just get Adam up and dressed and have his breakfast and go to work, it just killed him. It just was so hard. And he wrote a book about it, and and then he says, of all the people in my life, of all the spiritual directors, of everybody, Adam was the one who taught me the most.
Wow. So Frank for you and Adam for him.
Yeah, yeah. And this man also was very influential in my life. We were very, very good friends. And Henry had a very serious breakdown after a couple of years at L'Arche Daybreak. And so he really had to go through that. But of course, it brought out his genius. And he wrote a book called The Return of the Prodigal Son. And it's a classic. I mean, I'll send it to you, but it's a book you have to read. And then there's now a new book coming out about it, which is Henry Now and The Return of the Prodigal Son, which is talking about what was happening to him when he was writing this book, because he was just on the ground. He couldn't hardly get up. But he was a beautiful, beautiful soul, and he gave us so much. He was so talented and so pastoral, because of his heart being so, I don't know how to say that, so open, so welcoming, and a man who could speak about his vulnerabilities. I mean, he just named them. And we'd say, like people would say, oh, he's too confessional, as it were. But he said, we can talk about our wounds as long as we have dressed them. He said, the wounds have to be bandaged. So when I talk about my wounds, I'm not saying you need to come and help me. I'm just saying, this is what I'm dealing with, and I'm dealing with it. So you don't have to worry, but just so you know that this is what I'm dealing with. And I think that's very critical and crucial, that we can talk about our wounds as long as we're taking care of them, apart from kind of our everyday conversation.
Yeah, I see that in our culture, there's a lot of, I guess, a facade of what we want the world to see. Exactly. And and the social media and all that stuff, and and there's less authenticity. Right. And I think this new generation coming, wants and yearns for authenticity, and what we're talking about right now, and so these stories are really great to talk to you about. And as I understand it, that when this good priest passed away, he named you as the person that was supposed to deal with his works, right?
That's right. His literary.
Wow, that's a pretty big responsibility, sister.
Well, it was, and yeah. But I just want to say, when you talk about this generation, I've had a chance in the last couple of years to be working with some millennials and doing some work with them. And the thirst that I find in them and what they're doing in response to that is so marvelous. There's an organization now called Sacred Designs, and it's a couple of Harvard graduates from Harvard Divinity School who have taken an interest in the sort of what they call the nuns, N-O-N-E-S.
Right. Yes.
They have you say, what faith tradition do you belong to? None of the above. Church isn't for me.
Right.
But the longing in my heart and the desires that I have for transformation, self-transformation, transformation of the society, these are things that I'm longing for, and I'm willing to put my life on the line. And so Sacred Designs is helping people to do that. And now there's an organization called Nuns and Nuns. So the N-U-N-E-S and the N-O-N-E-S are getting together. They have monthly phone calls, and the young people go, and 5 of them went and spent 6 months in a convent in California and lived there with the sisters. They had no religious tradition. They went to work every day and they did their work, but they lived there with the sisters, and it was very transformative for them. So I think you're very correct that they're looking for the kind of things that we're talking about, but we have to present them maybe in a bit of a different way, and not put too much of what I want to say, a traditional enclosed kind of spirituality, but that allows some fresh air to be around that. This one woman who was grieving her mother's loss, and they wanted her back at work a week after the funeral, and she went back to work, and they were saying, "Why are you so grieved? Like, drop it. Your mother died. Like, let's go." Mm. And she just couldn't do it and everything. And so she met this other woman who had lost her boyfriend. She said, "We got to have dinner together." They started to have dinner and talked about their grief and their anguish and their mourning. And when the woman left, she said, "I'm coming back next week." And she brought friends. Anyway, this called now the dinner party, and it's in 300 cities in the United States. And people who come together just to talk about losing something that's valuable to them, and it's a safe place, and they can talk together. I mean, these are beautiful works that the young people are doing. So
yeah, I agree. I tell you, I employ millennials, and I am completely impressed with their work ethic and where they're at. And I have some as kids. I have 6 kids.
Oh, good.
And from 25 to 11, and so I'm taught things every day.
Yeah, you're there. Yeah, you're there.
I'm living in community too, sister.
You are.
Yeah, and we don't probably get as long as well as you and the sisters do. But Saint Michelle, my wife, she tries to keep it all together for all of us, and so we're trying. But listen, one thing is I could talk with you for hours, and I'm hopeful that I can talk to you down the road about issues that come up, because I think you've got something here that you can share with people. This, just from your life with Larch, being in a situation where, you're not the one that is teaching everything to everybody, but you're learning from these beautiful people that God created and purposely put in your life to make a difference in your life. I think it's something that we could talk about, and then we could talk about. I really want to talk to you about what your favorite books are, all that kind of stuff down the road. But will you have a conversation with me later on down the road after this one takes off?
I'd be happy to do it.
That's great. That's
as long
great.
As I have energy.
Yeah, and so before we end, can you tell me, do you follow any Toronto sports teams?
Yes, I like the Blue Jays.
They won a couple. They won a couple World Series titles, didn't they?
In 1992.
Okay, so this is my sore spot. So Toronto Blue Jays. So I grew up in Washington State, in a little town called Yakima, and the Seattle Mariners and the Toronto Blue Jays became expansion teams the same year, 1977. And the Blue Jays have been to the World Series, I think, more than once, and they've won one. Mariners have never been to the World Series, and so I feel bad about it. So can you please pray for my Seattle Mariners to actually just go one time?
I'll think about that one, Joe.
Well, good enough. Well, listen, thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for everything that you've done and then you're doing. And I'll pray for the Sisters of St. Joseph in Toronto, and I'll tell my kids at the dinner table that we spoke to somebody that's pretty important, that maybe we could read more about you.
Thanks a million. It's been beautiful to talk to you. Thank you.
All right. Take care, sister.
Bye now.
Bye. Thank you for listening to the opening statement with Joe Shannon. You can find us on the internet at shannonlawgroup.com or telephone our office at 312-578-9501. Have a terrific day.